Hi, everybody. Welcome to English Digest. I'm Tom.
Hi, I'm Stephanie.
And it's our News Digest unit for the month of March. It's also our All English unit for the month of March. We're just a few days past St. Patrick's Day, so you must have had a good time if you're Catholic. And today, of course, we're going to go down under to Australia and talk about their immigration policies. And that could affect people here in Taiwan because a number of people have or will immigrate to Australia at some point. Not all of us are going to go there. Of course, it's a great country and everything, but indeed, you might be thinking about immigration to this country, but you need to know about what's going on there regarding their policies.
Yeah, it's always a good idea to check out the country you're immigrating to permanently, or you want to be a resident and maybe even a citizen someday. Check out their government policies. This is especially important for those who are contemplating that right now. Actually, one of my best friends, she spends half the year down there, although they're not going to immigrate permanently. They just go down there when the weather gets hot here. So when the weather is hot in Taiwan, it's kind of nice in Australia. This isn't a policy that is very popular, though, and we're going to talk about some of the aspects of it, the negative aspects in particular. But first, guys, what we always do is we're going to read through today's article.
Australia's strict immigration policies have long been criticized, particularly for how they treat people with disabilities. Having been residents of Australia for years, Scottish Laura Curry and her Italian partner Dante Venditelli recently experienced the impact of these immigration policies. Their son Luca, born in Australia and diagnosed with cystic fibrosis, became the reason their residency application was denied due to the anticipated high healthcare costs. Had Luca been healthy, there would have been no objections to their permanent residency. This case not only highlights discrimination against disabled individuals, but also raises questions about fairness and inclusion within Australia's immigration system. For decades, Australia has been giving migrants with disabilities the cold shoulder, a policy rooted in its Migration Act of 1958. Despite years of revisions, current regulations still mandate rigorous health assessments for nearly all visa categories, capping acceptable medical expenses at 86,000 Australian dollars over 10 years. Regardless of how long an individual has lived in Australia, where they were born, or their financial ability to handle medical costs, they could face visa denial or deportation. This risk arises if the government perceives their future healthcare costs as excessive. Defending this stance, government officials argue that such policies are necessary to manage public resources and maintain a balanced healthcare system. Not everyone is convinced by this argument, however. Disabled rights advocates and critics view these policies as discriminatory violations of fundamental human rights that are at odds with Australia's proclaimed values of equality and inclusivity. They assert that the immigration system treats disabled applicants as if they were mere burdens rather than individuals with potential to contribute. The growing opposition and calls for reform across Australia's political arena indicate a pressing need for change. Truly promoting equality requires a critical re-evaluation of these immigration policies. If left unaddressed, the continued exclusion of disabled migrants will perpetuate social biases and damage Australia's reputation as an inclusive nation. Okay, it's time for us to discuss our article for today. The title is Australia's Immigration Policies Under Fire for Discrimination. So here, under fire is not the same as on fire. Maybe if you're not careful with matches in the house, your house might catch on fire. But here, if you're under fire, that means you're being criticized severely by someone. And yes, they have this policy in Australia, and some people are criticizing this policy. They're saying it's wrong, it's not fair, and they want the government to change it.
Yeah, that's a great idiom to learn, to be under fire, or sometimes we'll use come under fire. It can be literal, meaning you're being attacked with guns by someone. But here, as Tom said, it's being used as an idiom. It's not literal, it's figurative. Means you're facing really severe or harsh criticism. So you can come under fire, be under fire. These policies are being criticized, though, because people are saying they're discriminatory. So we're going to talk about that. Australia's strict immigration policies have long been criticized. So Australia has been very strict or very severe in who they want to allow to come to Australia and live there permanently. We're talking about immigration policies. If you're an immigrant, you're someone who moves to a new country and you have the intention of setting up your home there, settling there permanently. We're talking about people who are immigrating, not people who are going there for a quick vacation.
Right, so we're talking about immigration. That's the process of immigrating to another country. And again, their policies have been criticized for a long time, especially for how they treat people with disabilities. Okay, we used to call them handicapped people, but this term has fallen out of favor. We don't use it so much anymore. We will call someone with a problem disabled. Okay, maybe they can't walk, maybe they have some sort of disease or something like that. So we say you're disabled. And in this particular case, people are criticizing this policy in Australia. And having been residents of Australia for years, Scottish Laura Curry and her Italian partner Dante Venditelli recently experienced the impact of these immigration policies. So these people are from outside of Australia. We've got Laura Curry, and she's from Scotland. If something's from Scotland, you say it's Scottish, with the exception being the whiskey, Scotch whiskey, but a person from Scotland is Scottish. And in this particular case, she has a partner. I guess they're not married, but they're together. And his name is Dante Venditelli, and he's from Italy. He knows all about pizza and spaghetti.
If you're a resident, you're someone who lives somewhere. It could be, we were talking about the residence in a house or a home, the residence of a country, the residence of a city. Just because you're a resident somewhere doesn't mean that you're a citizen of that country. They do live there. They've lived there for years, it says. They probably have been just renewing a visa that allows them to stay there. I know that's what I had to do when I first came to Taiwan. I just kept renewing a visa every maybe 6 months. I can't remember. And now they want to live there permanently and become citizens. So in order to do that, it's kind of a long process. You have to apply and you have to pass certain tests that the government has for you. Well, while they've been living there, they had a boy. They had a son, and his name's Luca, which is so cute. I love that name. He was born in Australia, but when he was born, he was diagnosed with a disease called cystic fibrosis. If you diagnose something, we use this in particular in the medical field. As a doctor, you would look at someone's symptoms, take some tests, maybe do some x-rays or take an MRI, and then you identify what they're suffering from. You identify an illness or a problem. That's what diagnose means.
That's the verb. Of course, the noun is diagnosis. Yes, doctor, what is your diagnosis? What have I got? How long do I have to live? And in this particular case, the child was diagnosed with cystic fibrosis, which I guess is a pretty terrible disease here. It can cause lots of problems. And, of course, it's probably very expensive to treat. And this became the reason for their residency application, or at least that's the reason why their application was denied. Okay, so I don't think they're citizens of Australia yet. They're just residents there, and they applied for an extension on their visa, but it was denied because of their son. He has this disease, and this was because of anticipated high health care costs. Okay, so we can't let you stay in Australia because if you use our medical facilities here in Australia, you're going to cost a lot of money because you have that disease, so get out.
Yeah, they have socialized medicine in Australia, so anyone going to Australia is automatically going to be using the government's insurance policy.
Except tourists, I don't think they qualify, right?
Oh, you're just visiting, so you don't count. Yeah. No. So they were concerned. Cystic fibrosis usually just affected children. because most people who are born with cystic fibrosis would never live past their teenage years. It kind of makes it difficult to breathe. It's like taking the mucus or the ton in your body and making it really thick. Nowadays, they can help these people who are born with cystic fibrosis live into their 60s sometimes, but it's tough to breathe, and it takes a lot of help from the medical field. So the Australian government just said, your son will cost us too much money. We're not going to cover him, which you'll often hear if you're hearing about insurance. We can't cover you. We can't deal with that particular problem. You're too expensive for us. So they turned them down. They denied their residency application because they just said, hey, the healthcare costs are too high. You're going to have to leave.
You're going to have to go someplace else. Maybe they've got social medicine in Italy or in Scotland or whatever. Try your luck there, but you're not going to get such care here in the land down under. It says, had Luca been healthy, or if Luca had been healthy, there would have been no objections to their permanent residency. So if Luca was a regular kid without any problems, they would have said, no problem. You can stay here as long as you like. We're pretty laid-back people here in Australia. You're from Scotland. Cool. You're from Italy. Cool. You've got a son named Luca. Cool. You can hang out on Bondi Beach on New Year's Eve or whatever. No problem. Welcome here, but he's not healthy. He's got this problem, so his visa has been denied.
Yeah, this is an interesting way to write the English sentence, but we'll often do this. We'll even use it in a spoken form. Had someone done something or had something been the case, then this would not have happened, or the situation would have changed entirely. And Tom kind of switched it around, which we do too. If Luca had been healthy, they mean the same thing. It just gives you another way to write an English sentence. So this case not only highlights or puts the focus on discrimination against disabled individuals, but what else does it do? It raises questions about fairness and inclusion within Australia's immigration system. So we're kind of putting the focus on some of the problems down in Australia. Sorry, Australians out there listening. So we talked about if you're disabled, there's something wrong with your body that keeps you from living your life in kind of a normal way. It restricts you in some way. Maybe it's difficult to hear, difficult to see, difficult to get around. There are many ways that people struggle with being disabled. But it also raises questions, this article does, about whether the policies in Australia are very fair or if they're inclusive. Our vocabulary word here, inclusion, is a noun. Inclusive would be the adjective form. If you're talking about inclusion, it's the act of making people or a person feel a part of a group or a collection. It's not leaving people out. Excluding them would be the opposite, right? So if you want to include someone, means you welcome them into your group. If you exclude them, you're leaving them out in the cold. So inclusion is something that we're talking about. And whether this policy is really very fair, it's not like you can, decide how you're going to be born. You don't know what kind of disabilities you might have just upon birth.
This might be something for all of you to discuss here in Taiwan, because a number of people do come to Taiwan and immigrate here, or at least they become permanent residents here. So yes, should Zhenbao, should the National Insurance Program cover them if they have some terrible disease or some problem that's going to cost lots of money, like maybe they have kidney problems and they need to have dialysis 2 or 3 times a week. That could cost a lot of money. And yes, so should they be treated, or should they go back to the country where they're from? Well, here in the next paragraph, it says, for decades, Australia has been giving migrants with disabilities the cold shoulder, a policy rooted in its Migration Act of 1958. So this has been going on for decades. A decade is a period of 10 years. So it's been going on for 40, 50, 60 years or something like that. And if you're a migrant, that means you move from one place to another. It's similar to immigrant, but an immigrant is somebody who moves someplace legally and then they become a resident of that country.
It's permanent too.
Right. A migrant is just somebody who goes from place to place. I knew a guy from Texas who's Mexican-American, and he was a migrant worker when he was a kid. They would travel around the United States and do various jobs, agriculture jobs, picking fruit and stuff like that because they were fairly poor. So they were migrant workers.
Tom,
they were just moving around.
My father was a migrant worker.
Okay.
And he's not Mexican. They were very poor. I wanted to mention migrant could be to another country, right? But it could also just mean you're going to stay within that country and just you move temporarily to different places because you're looking for work. So migrant, yeah. Immigrant, you must be moving to another country. It doesn't mean it's legal. You could be an illegal immigrant, but you're moving to another country with the intent of staying there permanently. Migrants go from place to place, and it's very temporary.
And the verb is to migrate, and you can use this to talk about birds, for example, like the black-faced spoonbill. That bird is a migratory bird. It comes to Taiwan during a part of the year, and then it goes back to some islands off of Korea or something like that. It's a migratory bird. It migrates between different parts of the world. And yes, the government there has been giving these people the cold shoulder. If somebody gives you the cold shoulder, they just kind of ignore you. They don't pay any attention to you. And this is all because of this Migration Act that was passed way, way, way back in 1958.
Notice too, guys, the verb you use with cold shoulder is give. Give someone the cold shoulder. Again, it's an idiom we often use, actually. And you could use it just in your daily lives. Maybe you're going to school and you've got your little clique or your little group of friends and you give somebody the cold shoulder. It means you're not being friendly to them and you're kind of excluding them. We're going to take a quick break. We're not going to listen to our Chinese teacher, though, because we don't have a Chinese teacher today. But we will be taking a quick break. And then we'll be back to continue on with this particular discussion.
Okay, let's continue with our lesson. Again, we talked about this law in Australia. It's the Migrant Act of 1958. And part of that law probably requires people to not go to Australia if they have disabilities or denies them residency if they have disabilities or certain disabilities. And despite years of revisions, even though they have revised this law many, many times, current regulations or current laws still mandate rigorous health assessments for nearly all visa categories, capping acceptable medical expenses at 86,000 Australian dollars over 10 years. So they've got these rigorous health assessments. If something's rigorous, it is thorough, it is complete. They have all sorts of different assessments or evaluations of your condition, of your health condition. So, of course, you're not going to get anything past them if they're going to find out what's wrong with you. And they mandate this, they require this. So, of course, they also have a cap on this, a limit, an upper limit of how much money can be spent on a person who's sick in a period of 10 years. That limit is 86,000 Australian dollars, which probably won't cover the expenses of Luca, who has cystic fibrosis. The bill is probably going to be much higher than that.
Yeah, that's kind of tough. Well, what are you going to do? I think they're trying to protect their own citizens, who have to pay those taxes to cover the insurance. And I'm wondering, Tom, why they don't just say, if you go beyond that point, then you'll have to pay out of pocket and still allow them to renew a visa. Because it's obvious that this family loves Australia. They want to stay there. They're not looking for, a gift of money. Anyway, it's something that needs to be considered. I think that it's something that will continue to be looked at, I'm sure. But I think everybody is getting tired of having our taxes increased.
Right. Of course, these things have to be paid for by the government. So, of course, it comes from taxes. But, of course, having social medicine or national health insurance is nice. You're taken care of. But, of course, lots of people will abuse the program. I'm not saying Luca is abusing the problem here.
Yeah.
Luca obviously has a problem, and it needs to be addressed. But there you have it. Australia, they are not willing to pay his medical expenses. Now, regardless of how long an individual has lived in Australia, It doesn't matter how long they have lived there, where they were born. It doesn't matter where they were born. Or it does not matter about their financial ability to handle medical costs. Despite all these things, they could face visa denial or deportation. Now, here we've got the word denial, and that's a noun. It just refers to when you are not given something, they refuse to give you something that you wanted or that you requested. And the verb is to deny. That means you're not allowed to have something that you want. It also means that you may say something is untrue. If somebody accuses you of something, you can deny it. Say, hey, you robbed the bank. No, I deny that. I did not do that. But in this usage here, it just means you're not given the visa. And also you could face deportation, which means you get kicked out of the country. You gotta get out.
Yeah. Now, a synonym or a similar word for denial would be refusal. You could use that too. Usually we use denial when we're talking about refusal for some sort of application that you filled out and you want to have approved for some reason. Here it's their visa, of course. And they were denied. They got a denial on their application. And as Tom said, deportation is kicking someone out of the country. It's actually the government forcibly removing someone from a country, usually because you have broken a law or you've done something illegal. And that's that country's right. They have the right to deport you if you've committed a crime or even if you snuck in illegally. If you sneak in, it means you do something and you don't want to be caught doing it. You've got a lot of that going on in America, as you know. But it's happening all around the world. And sometimes the people who live there in the countries, they're already facing a heavy burden taking care of their own families. So sometimes, deportation is the only way a country can continue to exist. So the risk arises or comes up if the government perceives or they have this opinion that their future health care costs are going to be excessive. Excessive means more than you could even comprehend, more than the limit that they've already set out. And it sounds like poor Luca's healthcare costs could be excessive in the future.
Yeah, maybe they'll have to go back to Scotland or Italy and try their luck there. I don't think any insurance company will insure them at this point because they know about the problem that they have. So they're in a little bit of a pickle there.
Yeah, it's hard.
And here in the next paragraph it says, defending this stance or this opinion, this position, government officials argue that such policies are necessary to manage public resources and maintain a balanced healthcare system. So here we're not using the word argue as some sort of conflict. Hey, they got in an argument. They're arguing, the wife and the husband are arguing about money or something like that. But here you're just stating your position on something and you're supporting it. This happens in politics all the time. You may argue that the government has a good policy for trade, for example, or relations with other countries. And they argue or they state, they let us explain or they explain it to us that, yes, we have to have these policies. They're needed. They're necessary because we have to manage those public resources. We can't keep spending money and go in debt. And also we want to balance our healthcare system to make sure most people are taken care of. And we don't want some people to receive too much money and other people too little money.
I wanted to mention with stance, it could also mean the way you're standing, your position. He had a very rigid stance. But here, as Tom said, it just means your opinion on something, your attitude towards something. I could say, hey, Tom, what's your stance on the keto diet, which is kind of popular? Or what's your stance on allowing kids to learn how to swim before they can walk? What's your stance on that? What's your opinion? What's your attitude? So, yeah, they are kind of debating this because that's what we need to do in government because people all have different opinions. And then you debate and you come to a conclusion or a decision. Not everyone's convinced by this argument, though, that they need to, be very careful about allowing too many disabled people to immigrate or continue to live in the country. Disabled rights advocates and critics view these policies as discriminatory, that they're not fair, that they're treating people differently. So it's something that I think is going to continue to be debated. Now, remember, an advocate is a person who is arguing or supporting a particular position. This is the noun form. If you use the verb to advocate for something or someone, because you can argue to support a person too, not just an issue, you would use a different pronunciation. Advocate is the verb. Advocate is the noun, the person. So they're going to continue to debate this issue.
Yep, they're saying these are discriminatory, they're violations of fundamental human rights, and these human rights, or these laws actually, are at odds with Australia's proclaimed values of equality and inclusivity. Okay, so to be at odds with something means that some things are not matching up. They say this one thing, but then they do something else. They're kind of being hypocrites here. That's basically what they're saying. They're saying, yes, you're Australia, you're supposed to support human rights, you're supposed to support people who need it, but then you're saying this person cannot have medical care because they have this problem. So, yes, you're at odds with your values there. You're in conflict, you could also say.
Or you're being hypocritical.
Yes, indeed. And these are proclaimed values. If you proclaim something, you state something to be the case. You're basically stating your opinion about something, or you're stating your stance or your policy about something, and you're letting people know about it. And, of course, if you break your promise, you might get in big trouble. And, of course, they've got values of equality. Everybody should be treated equally. And they've got values of inclusivity. Everybody should be included. Everybody should be taken care of.
I wanted to mention this phrase, at odds. You can be at odds with someone or at odds with something. Or you could say, for example, my sister and I are at odds over where we're going to spend our summer vacation. So you can be at odds with somebody over something or at odds with somebody or something. So try to use that if you get the chance in the next couple of months. That'll increase your vocabulary. And as Tom said, proclaim just means to state very firmly, loudly, publicly. You could also use the verbs declare or announce. But proclaim is pretty strong, I would say. So they assert, or they say, assert is a very strong verb too. They assert with a lot of confidence that the immigration system treats disabled applicants as if they were mere burdens rather than individuals with potential to contribute. Mere here is being used to emphasize how small or insignificant somebody is or something is. They're just burdens. Oh, they're nothing. They're just burdens, which really sounds terrible because everybody's, a human being and needs to be treated with respect.
Right. This might happen with people who are vegetables. Basically, they don't have any response, so they're not conscious. They're in bed all the time. So maybe people would think they're just a burden. We're just spending all this money on keeping those people alive. It's a similar concept. So that's their criticism of this policy. And the growing opposition and calls for reform across Australia's political arena indicate a pressing need for change. Okay, so we've got people opposing this particular law. That's opposition. You could describe that as the political party that is not in power. Right now, the DPP is in power, and then the KMT are the opposition. They're the ones who are not in power. And this is in the USA as well. The Republicans are in power, and the Democrats are the opposition. But here we've got opposition, or people who are against this policy. And so they call for reform. They're saying we should reform these laws. And this is across the political arena of Australia in all the laws and all the departments of the government. And yes, they indicate that there's a pressing need for change. We got to change things. This cannot continue.
So truly promoting equality requires a critical reevaluation of these immigration policies. Critical here just means looking at something for the flaws and also the positive parts of it too. To be very critical in looking at something and not just sort of going, it's fine, whatever. You're doing a very, very careful and thorough reevaluation of what's going on there. It says here, if left unaddressed, if you don't change something, it's left unaddressed. So you want to address a problem and not leave it unaddressed. because it's still there. The problem doesn't just go away. The continued exclusion, not including, exclusion of disabled migrants will perpetuate social biases and damage Australia's reputation as an inclusive nation, and they kind of take pride in that. They pride themselves on that kind of, I guess, adjective describing their country, that they're very inclusive. What does perpetuate mean here, Tom?
That means to make something continue indefinitely, okay? You just let it stop. So, of course, these social biases will continue and they won't stop. So, of course, we want to change Australia's reputation as a country that welcomes everybody. So, of course, they'll probably have to address this law, but they also need to figure out how they can pay for people who have really expensive medical treatments. Okay, let's end our lesson now by saying goodbye. We have no Chinese teacher, so that's it for today. Thank you so much for joining us, and please join us again next time. And check out our content on YouTube and Facebook. Hey, you might like what you see. From all of us here at English Digest, I'm Tom.
I'm Stephanie.
Goodbye.
Bye.